But in Florida, we didn't see that. And I think until probably last November, many of us were still traumatized by that Florida election. And for myself, I was asked in 2004, 4 years later, to help the Democratic National Committee set up a national voter protection program nationally that would put people in the polls to make sure the law was followed. And then if people were turned away, we would know about it and be able to address it so that we weren't sitting there on election night hearing about all these stories, but we were actually taking part in trying to reduce barriers to voting on election day. So we had about 17,000 people in every major Democratic precinct throughout the country ready to protect voters on election day. And then, do you remember what happened in 2004? Mm-hmm. Ohio. Mm-hmm. The machines in Ohio, electronic voting machines, put into place by the decision of the Secretary of State, Ken Blackwell. He put more machines in the rural areas than there were in Cleveland, so as a result, voters in Cleveland, which mostly vote Democratic, had to wait in line 8 hours to vote, whereas voters in other parts of the state could just walk in and out with no line at all. And as a result, the Ohio election went Republican, went for Bush, and so did the country. But at the bottom line, and there's still stories coming out about how the Ohio election may not have actually reflected the will of those Ohio voters, again because of small decisions the Secretary of State made that affected the outcome of the election. Now Michigan is interesting because we're not in Florida, we're not in Ohio. We're actually a state that has a history of running great elections. And under Richard Austin, when he was Secretary of State, we were actually a leader for how we ran elections. Richard Austin came up with the idea for motor voter, the law that allows you to register to vote when you get your driver's license in the Secretary of State branch offices. That was his idea out of our Secretary of State's office, and it became a national policy. So Michigan historically has been a state that's led the way. It's been a state that people have looked to for ideas. In the same way that we've led the way in various other industries, from the auto industry to music to sports. I mean, Michigan is a state that has given so much to this country. And we're at a turning point, as we all know, in our state's history, where we've got to start innovating again. And so I'm running for Secretary of State so that we can make that office an innovator again, really put into place best practices that have been in place in other states around the country, and make Michigan a leader in how we run elections. I, in 2008, last year, started writing a book on Secretaries of State because I wanted to tell a story of how important that office is for democracy. It's called Democracy and the Secretary, and I interviewed Secretaries of State around the country about elections and said, how have you used your office to improve elections, to promote and guard democracy? And the practices that I learned from them were amazing, wide-ranging, making it so you can register to vote online through the Secretary of State's website, making it so that if you do show up in the wrong precinct, you can still cast a ballot that will be counted. All of these small decisions the Secretary of State can make and implement that can really protect voters on Election Day and advocate for voters on all days of the year. And so for me, I saw this inspiring group of Secretaries of State around the country doing really innovative things, Democrats and Republicans. But our Secretary of State at that same time was, was closing branch offices around the state. I fought successfully to keep one open in Buena Vista Township, but still we saw this sort of reduction in access to government in the past couple of years. And then the fall of 2008 was a real turning point, I think, for me in my decision to run. In September 2008, there were rumors that emerged out of Houghton County. Some of you might remember this, saying that if you're dealing with foreclosure, if you're facing foreclosure, you might be challenged or blocked from voting on Election Day. And there was lots of controversy over whether they were rumors or not, and they actually came out in other states as well. And the Secretary of State in Ohio, Jennifer Brunner, came out the day after these rumors were emerged and said, absolutely not, under Ohio law, you cannot be blocked from voting because your home's in foreclosure. It's illegal to do so, and she made sure her voters knew that they were going to be protected on Election Day. We did not have that same voice from our Secretary of State. I actually went to Congress and testified before the House Judiciary Committee in Washington, D.C., outlining what I thought Secretaries of State should do. But most importantly, what they should do is stand up for voters and say, with their microphone that they have as Secretary of State, no voter in this state will be blocked from voting because they're dealing with financial crises or lost their job or they're dealing with foreclosure at all. Voters need to know that their Secretary of State is a friend, is an ally, is on their side, and is fighting for them. And when I saw that in other states and did not see that in our state, I just felt that voters deserve more. Voters deserve a state and a Secretary of State that's going to fight for them every day and make sure that their right to vote is protected. And that's what I've built my whole career doing. But of course, that's not, that's sort of who I am and why I'm running, but that's not what this campaign is about. I'm running because I want to make sure that that office is accessible to everyone across the state, is responsive to everyone across the state, and is accountable to every single voter and citizen in this state. And that's why we're running this campaign in this statewide grassroots method, when we're going to run the campaign the same way we're going to run the office, which is every single county is going to have access to that secretary, to our office, the Secretary of State. We're recruiting right now for our campaign county coordinators in every single county, all 83 counties. We want to have someone there who can right now be the eyes and ears of our campaign to make sure that the campaign is informed by what's going on. If there are problems in Houghton, we want to know about them so that we can build a platform that addresses them. But most important to me is that when we're in that office as Secretary of State, that those same folks, that all of you are still on board helping me know what's going on in Houghton, so that when there's a problem with voting, when there's a problem with a branch office, that our office in Lansing or Detroit or wherever we're headquartered knows about it and is able to come up here and help and be responsive to you. Because that's the most important thing, in my view, that a Secretary of State can do. As the access point to state government for you, we need to make sure that your ideas, your suggestions, your concerns are heard and are responded to. So that's really why we're doing this 83 county tour right now, because I want to know what the problems are in Houghton. I want our campaign to be informed so that our policies, our goals, and what I'm saying as I go around the state or when I'm on Tim Skubik's show is really reflective and informed by what's actually happening here. Because again, the most important thing to me is that that office serves all of you. And we can only get there if you're all helping us and helping us stay informed about what the problems are. So I can commit to you that you'll always have my ear, that you'll always have my number, and that you can have direct access to our office. That if you have a concern with your branch office, there's a complaint process, there's a way to go through it. If you have a problem with voting, you can go to the Secretary of State's office and have an ally on your side. If you have a problem with your clerk, if you have any problems on Election Day, you know that the Secretary of State's office is first and foremost an advocate for voters and protecting voters. So that's why I'm running, because it's unacceptable for that young woman in Detroit to be turned away from voting and blocked from voting. And if she had a Secretary of State like Sam Reed, a Republican Secretary of State in Washington, who implemented a policy that said if you show up in the wrong precinct, you can still cast a statewide ballot, allowing you to vote for president in the statewide offices. That's what I want to see here in Michigan.